Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Toby Demker. Welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining us again. It's a beautiful day in Hamburg, Germany, and we are here to have another conversation about something related to personal development, leadership, culture change, all those kind of things for personal development and career development. And glad you've joined us again. And I just want to give everybody a reminder, if you're watching this on YouTube and you think this adds value, please like and subscribe. Otherwise, thanks for listening to us on our podcast. How are you doing today, Toby?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. The sun is shining here in Sweden as well after a day of snow in late April. So we had spring and then winter came back, so we're kind of in the middle of things here. But still, things are looking bright.
I actually I'm laughing because I was talking to someone in Canada, in Eastern Canada, this week, who said, "Yeah, we just had a spring snowfall," and
Yeah.
yeah, quite a contrast. Anyway, great. We'll just jump right into it because another big topic, as they always are. We just never seem to have enough time to get through all the stuff we want to talk about. But it's your topic today, so why don't you take us into it?
All right. Well, so I haven't thought about how to introduce it, but I mean this concept of authenticity, right? How central it is to leadership and to personal development and just self-awareness in general. And it's a really big, it's a central topic, I think, that is important when we talk about these things. So I thought we could dig into that a little bit.
Absolutely.
So authenticity, and as I'm thinking about it, I mean, there's different kinds of definitions for all of these things, I guess. And authenticity is a very big, it's a big theme. But for me, authenticity is really about, and I think it relates to the sort of psychological definition of it as well, to be able to that your actions are very congruent with your words and your values.
Mm.
So obviously that creates a kind of sustainability, perhaps credibility, predictability in actions, both for yourself but also in your influence on other people. So I reckon that's pretty central to everything that we're talking about here, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we've talked about values. We've talked about so many related topics, and they all, systemically, they all interrelate to another. The authenticity piece is really important from a leadership perspective, but also all of our relationships. And I think a lack of authenticity is where a lot of things go wrong. Because trust is so central to our personal and business relationships, and that sense of being able to trust someone, that sense of having rapport with someone, a lot of it does come from authenticity, and people kind of sense it. They can't put their finger on it, but they kind of sense it, right?
Mm.
So,
Yeah, I think that could be a good place to start, because I mean we can attack it, or we can sort of attack the topic from from different perspectives. Um, and speaking about authenticity is of course easy, but to be authentic and to find authenticity, I don't think it's that easy. And it's interesting what you mentioned. If there's a lack of authenticity, what does that lead to?
mm,
And I think I've referred to the leadership circle a few times in this podcast already, but it's a instrument that I've been working with a bit, and there's a theory about that they call the tent model, where authenticity is kind of the mid central pillar in the leadership model. And you can be low on certain things, that's fine, you can be low, but if it's lacking, or if it's not existing, then everything falls apart. Right. So in that sense, authenticity is really central to hold up your leadership spectrum. And you can just think about what it might look like if you're lacking authenticity. I mean, for me, if I encounter someone who I perceive as lacking authenticity, how that affects my trust in this individual. Am I willing to listen or to engage with this individual? I think it has really, just from experience, I think it has a real detrimental effect on your influence on others if you're lacking that kind of authenticity.
Yeah,
and it could be the perception in me, right? So
absolutely.
how do you yeah exhibit this kind of authenticity?
Yeah, it's funny. As soon as we start talking about these topics, it's like, wow, there's so many directions we can take this because it goes quite deep. For one, the one thing that springs to mind automatically is this. Well, you know, the famous Shakespeare quote, "To thine own self be true," and you know, the whole "know thyself." The thing is that in order to be authentic, you do need to have a sense of your values. You do need to have a sense of who you are, your identity. And it's interesting to think about from childhood. We kind of learn to um, to adjust our behavior to fit the social norms, right? And
Hmm.
so we are children are often these are the behaviors that are going to please other people. These are the ones that aren't, and so to and then as you grow older and get into adolescence, your teenage years, you're trying to figure out who you are, right?
Mm.
And um, and I think when people they have a sense of their values, their needs, but they're not always willing to there's a element of vulnerability there, right? So what
Yeah.
happens if you're being your authentic self and you're rejected? How does that make you feel when people reject the person you're authentically trying to be? So I think that's one part of it. But I think from a scientific perspective, it's interesting because I've heard neuroscientists talk about how the fact that there's no place in the brain where the I exists, where the authentic self. People talk about the self and the authentic self, and because
Yeah.
it's something that a lot of spiritual people kind of point towards, and so the scientific response to that is, well, there is no place in the brain that is the authentic self. But for me, the definition is kind of when you strip away a lot of the conditioning, that sort of your natural tendencies, your the person that you are, the personality that you exhibit when you're not being judged, or when you're not under pressure to perform, or when you're not in a situation where you lack the trust to kind of show and behave the way you would naturally behave, or say the things you'd naturally say.
Mm.
So I mean, but that's only one side of it, because often challenges or difficult situations will also reveal a lot about your character and who you are authentically, right? So
Sure.
there's just so many different ways you can look at it from. But in terms of what happens if you aren't authentic, I think you see this in the business world a lot. People towing the company line, people who are saying things that you can recognize they don't really believe. They're saying them because they have to say them, and that makes for a lot of challenges from the leadership side, or any kind
Mm.
of relationships. People who are saying things to get ahead, people who are saying things because they're trying to influence you or win you over to their opinion. There's tons of examples of inauthenticity.
Mm.
So, um, so yeah, and I think we know where that leads. When we've all kind of met the sales guy, and I've been a sales guy, or
Mm.
the people who are trying to sell you something, or trying to convince you of their opinion, and when it's not authentic, it just doesn't resonate with you. I know it's a very intuitive thing, but it's hard to quantify. But authenticity, I think
Yeah.
those are the ways that I kind of come at it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we can agree. I mean, we've chosen the topic, and as we're speaking about it, I think we can agree that yes, it's important. It's something that is central to personal development, to leadership development, to influencing, to building trust, etc. But I think that you raise a few really important points here, and there's I think her name is Ibarra. It's a professor in I don't know, some university, but she's been writing about the authenticity paradox. How everybody is talking about authenticity and the importance of authenticity, and that we have to be true to ourselves at all times, etc. But she also points out that there can be a real downside to being too authentic in certain situations, right? In some situations, especially if you're a leader and or if you're in a leadership position and you have you have to influence others. Being being your true self at all times may not be the best option, actually, because if you're for example, if you're in a situation where there's a real big crisis and everybody needs direction and to move, to do something, and if you're being too authentic about your own fears and your own, I don't know, unsecurity about what to do. That's not going to have a really helpful effect on what the team or the people around you need at that situation. So you also have to put that into context that we are social animals. We're always in some kind of context. And I think, I mean, if I look at myself, I struggle with authenticity for sure. I don't think it's very easy to be your true self or your true authentic self at all times. I mean, it would be impossible. What does that even look like? Because we to some extent, we always try to fit in, right?
Absolutely.
Um, but creating, as I'm saying that, when you find yourself in an environment where you feel at least more able or more have more liberty to express yourself more authentically and be more open. Yeah, it's quite a relief, right?
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
good feeling.
yeah, and I don't think it's inauthentic to play a certain role in a certain situation. I think from a systemic perspective, right, we all have different elements of our personality, and to kind of focus on one over another isn't necessarily inauthentic. I think we are different with you might be different with your partner or with your parents than you would be a client or in a business setting, right? There are just different
Yeah.
attributes that you express, different ways that you communicate because of the fact that either it's not fitting, it's not appropriate in the situation, or
Mm.
the other, what the expectations are of the environment or the situation. And so I don't think that it's inauthentic to step into a role. I mean, I'm not. I'm really not a person who loves to be in the spotlight. I don't need to be in the center of attention. So when we do things like give a workshop or give a talk, if you're speaking in front of 100 people or whatever, for me, if I'm my kind of introverted self, that's not going to be but that doesn't mean that I'm inauthentic when I'm getting up in front of people and talking and being expressive and trying to engage
Mm.
with them. It's not sort of my the kind of average me you would see at home, but
Yeah.
I'm stepping into a role because it's the best way to connect with people, and the things that I'm saying, and I think authenticity is important, that you're not, those roles that we've developed, they're still part of us, right? Those different elements of our character are still authentic, as long as you're not getting up in front of people and talking about things that you don't really believe in,
Mm.
or you're just saying things in order to get a response from people, or you're putting your own values in a compromising situation. I think those are the things that are inauthentic. If you're having a debate, or you're coaching someone, or if you're managing someone, leading someone, and then
Mm.
you're saying things that you don't actually believe in, they're going to sense that level of authenticity, in my
Yeah.
view. So I think
Yeah. No.
that's the approach that I take.
Yeah. I mean, I'm also reflecting a little bit about how, if I have people around me that would see that I meet in a certain context, if they would see myself in a different context, how they would react to that, because they would probably see a different side that they don't see of me, and would that be authentic? Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I also believe that you play different roles and you show different parts of yourself in different situations, perhaps. But you choose what part of the Johara window you wanna show, kind of, right?
But there's
So.
a great example of you. I remember when we worked together in China, and we're giving introductions, and you shared something about yourself. You said, I'm a heavy metal fan, right? And And
Hmm.
in a business context, you never know how people are going to react, and or the judgment that. But that showed, it was nothing to do with work, so it wasn't going to interfere. And I thought that was very authentic. So take me as I am. This is what I do in my private time. It won't interfere the work, and so
Yeah.
so I think because it does give a certain impression of you, but I think that was a level of authenticity that was good because it kind of opened the door. Was here's a peek into who I am privately, and but still you see how I am professionally, and I
Yeah.
think that those kind of little bits of vulnerability, those really help people develop that trust and make you comfortable enough to be authentic.
Yeah. Well, that's great to hear, and I do believe that being transparent and showing that you can be authentic, that really that's trust building kind of thing. Um, I'm also thinking about, what does it look like then if you're lacking that authenticity, or if that perception of authenticity isn't there? What does that lead to? Um,
Well,
I don't know. Do you have any in
well,
situations where you meet people that you don't find are really authentic?
yeah, it's people who are not confident often. It reveals a lot of insecurity. They don't feel comfortable sort of exposing themselves because in psychology you talk about the true self and the false self, and the false self is something that's developed over time as a means of protection, right? It's a means of well, if I show you who I really am, then I'm being vulnerable, and I don't want to be vulnerable around anyone. If you're not willing to be vulnerable, it's really difficult to have authentic relationships, right? I mean
Yeah.
that's the bottom line there. So I think what it looks like is we've all had those encounters with people where we didn't really feel like we could trust them, or they just seem like you didn't know that you didn't feel like you knew what was below the surface, and it's hard to connect with those kind of people because if people aren't willing to at least give you a glimpse of who they are beyond sort of the social norms and the proper etiquette that is fine and normal and good and productive in a lot of ways, because you don't want to be triggering people. But think about something like someone who is like let's talk about an extreme case. Someone who is either they know that they're part of the gay community, or they know that they're transgendered, and they live this lie their whole life, and how
Mm.
uncomfortable that must feel because they feel like they're not able to express who they really are, right? And I don't want to touch on a sensitive topic. It's not something I have a lot of experience with, but certainly, how I think that's probably an extreme case of what it's like to have to be or to feel like you have to be inauthentic all the time around people, right? So
Yeah.
so on sort of a less sensitive level, there are people who just don't feel comfortable sharing what they're really interested in, right? Or sharing their opinions, like people who are so eager to, well, what do you think, and then, well, that's what I think too, just trying to jump on what everybody thinks. So that's a more common type of inauthenticity that I don't think people feel comfortable living this role all the time, but we do it so often, because we
Mm.
feel this pressure, because of our own concerns about being judged, because of our fear of not being accepted. We all want to be accepted, and look,
Yeah.
we've thrived as a species on cooperation, and if you don't feel like people are going to want to cooperate with you, it's going to affect how you present yourself, how you interact with people. So I think those are the fears maybe behind it. Those are the perceived consequences of being too authentic. And
Sure.
and as you said, it's about finding that line. It's knowing how to present those authentic sides of yourself. If you're too flamboyant, or you use language that offends people, you know,
Mm.
that may be your authentic self, but you're not gonna. People are only gonna see you for that, and they're not gonna see all your other good qualities.
Yeah. I mean, that could also be strategies for kind of not being authentic. Actually, could be the opposite, that I I use some kind of I don't know, arrogant language or arrogant attitudes to sort of protect myself and not being authentic, actually, right? I'm not a psychiatrist, but I do believe that that could be the case.
Yeah.
But I'm hearing what you're saying. I think we're getting into a little bit about this, these social contexts of how we can create a platform or a more inclusive, I guess, environment for people to be able to be authentic, right? Because uh, I asked the question to you, what does it look like when people are inauthentic? And I think about a few relationships that I've been involved in. I mean, just with people in around me, and it's a sense of not knowing where, what's really going on. What is this person individual thinking? And it might be this day it's that, and the other day it's something else, and it's really difficult to have a trusting relationship with this kind of a individual. So I mean, just imagining or picturing what it looks like if you're lacking that kind of authenticity.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
a philosopher, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who talked about asked the question, are we all wearing masks? And
yeah.
I guess the answer is to some degree yes. And don't you love those people who take the mask off and you go, wow, they have the courage to just be who they are,
Yeah.
and they are disruptive. They aren't always. It's not always comfortable. But don't you kind of feel this admiration for people who are willing and able to do that?
I was gonna say, I mean, there's admiration, but also a sense of wow, that looks so, or it's a sense of freedom or liberty, like
Mm.
if you're able to just be the, and it seems natural and it's influential and the perception is that it's very easy to somehow, right? Um,
For some, it is, I guess.
yeah, maybe it is. But thinking about myself, I think I mentioned that I can struggle with authenticity. I mean, I think I'm pretty clear in my values, what I like and what I don't like. But in certain contexts, I'm not sure, and I can feel like I can be easily persuaded by different kind of arguments, and that can be a real struggle. And then it becomes difficult to be authentic. I'm not really sure what I think. What's the best solution here? What do I really think about this? I don't think it's that easy, to be authentic all the time. I wish it was, but for me, I get torn in a lot of situations. And
Mm.
then it's really important to just, okay, take a step back and, what do I really think about this? And I don't know if it's the introvert part of me or the reflective part of me, but I need some time to figure that out. I can't just make it up like that. I need to sleep on it or think about it. And then when I've sort of convinced myself, then it's very easy to be authentic about it. But it can take some time.
Absolutely. I don't think that anybody is 100% authentic all the time. I think we have this idea of ourselves and who we want to be presenting. Some people who think they're really authentic are kind of emphasizing one part of who they are because that's what they want to present. And they think that if they're not really putting that at the forefront, then they're not being authentic. Again, it comes back to how you want to define it for yourself. I think that at the end of the day, if you are comfortable with yourself in social situations and you walk away from conversations not feeling like you had to compromise your values or your ideals, the things you really believe. Sometimes it's just not appropriate to put your to be forceful about your opinions. And I don't think the I think if you are trying to really push this is who I am down someone's throat to
Mm.
that doesn't I think it's about offering authenticity, but if someone's not comfortable with it, not like going full on with it. So yeah, it's finding balance. And I think to say, I really thought this, but I knew it was going to hurt their feelings, and there was no benefit or value in making them aware of my opinion. is that inauthentic? I think that's just good etiquette and just good communication skills and having some empathy for someone else's feelings, right? So I don't think that it always needs to be full on. And as long as you don't walk away from situations consistently feeling like, I had to kind of lie my way through that. I had to kind of be somebody I'm not. I think we know those kind of things, and I think, we talk about how we talked before about values and how they drive our behaviors, and it is difficult to know who am I really, who am I on an authentic level, and I think the important thing is to make sure pieces of that authenticity are out there in your day-to-day behavior. I think previously philosophers talked about you'll have someone who's really religious and can't understand if you are an atheist, for example. And where do you get your values? Like, why are you not immoral all the time if you don't have this belief structure? And that comes from a belief that Nietzsche asked, where do our values come from? And previously it was thought that your values come from God or from your religion. And then sort of through the Enlightenment, people kind of realized that, well, your values are intrinsic. They come from your experiences, your upbringing, and you recognizing the needs that you have. And so Nietzsche also asked that whole, is that who we are? And so I think values are a big part of who we are. And that's why it's so important to do these exercises around understanding your values, because it's a big part of what makes us unhappy is, when we are not in congruence with our values, and that is a real sense of inauthenticity, right? When we're not living in tune with our values and those needs that need to be fulfilled. So I think when we talk about authenticity, it's important to look at your values, and how not living those in your everyday interactions affects your relationships, the trust you build, how you feel about the way you're going through life. It's a big part of happiness, right? Are you putting yourself in situations where you could be authentic? And if not, then is it a matter of building your confidence? Is it a matter of not being around people who are so judgmental, or there are just a lot of different factors, I think, that play a role.
Yeah, sure. I reacted to a few things there, and one of the things about values that I think is really important there is, we talk about values from coming from or being influenced by, it might be, as you said, religion or family or culture or upbringing or etc. But what is it that makes these values mine? What does that process look like? And I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but obviously it's something about your own experience and the own choice, the personal choices that you make, that works for you, and then it's an incremental process of making these values your own and very personal. So I do believe that that's a real key there to maybe finding your authenticity. I don't really agree. Maybe that wasn't what you were saying, but if you're not clear on that, it doesn't make you inauthentic, right? It
No.
can be kind of a struggle that because this is an ongoing journey, but to identify these values, and it might be an unconscious process that you're going through, but as you're maturing, things become clear for you, and it makes it easier for us to be authentic. But I think by some kind of self-awareness exercises that we can accelerate that process of making it clear for ourselves, and understanding ourselves better. And then, I mean, it goes back to Lao Tzu and Taoism that he talks about, 自知之明, which is like being, by understanding yourself, you're very wise. Understanding others, it makes you strong. But there's a process of that the foundation is really to be understanding yourself and sort of winning over yourself. That makes you very powerful, and then you can have a positive effect on others as well.
Hmm. It's funny. I
Um,
was I was wondering when you said that. Are these really my values? I was wondering, is there a benefit to asking ourselves, are these my values? Because, uh, but now that as I think about it, of course, because I think some people go through life um, playing a certain role for such a long time that they lose sight of their values, their authenticity. They lose sight of who they really are, and then one day they wake up in a life where they and this is what comes when sometimes when people come to me for coaching, when they not necessarily have a midlife crisis, but they're at a turning point where they're asking a lot of questions and going,
mm,
yeah, I'm about to turn 40 or maybe whatever age it is, where they're starting to ask these questions, and they're going, well, I've ticked all these boxes that society has said, this is going to lead me to happiness and success, and they're like, well, I don't feel happy, I don't feel fulfilled, I don't feel the things that I thought I was going to experience as I sort of progressed through this path that society tells me is the logical path.
mm,
And that's the issue when you don't self-reflect and you don't question, is this the right thing for me? I recommend to people, with big decisions that they're making in life, it's like, is this getting me closer to or farther from where I want to be? And
yeah.
then if you can't answer that question because you don't know where you want to be, then then obviously a lot more work needs to be done. But I think you're right. I think it is important to ask yourself, to reflect on who am I really, who am I just playing roles, am I just playing these roles
Mm,
to please other people? And I think like there's some great exercises, and you mentioned one before about figuring out your values. That's an important one. But looking back to, sometimes I recommend, well, what were the things that you were curious about, you know in your younger years? Maybe it was as a teenager, maybe it was in your 20s, maybe it was when you were going to university, but just a time in your life when you were uninhibited. There was no clear path laid out for you, and things you were just curious about. And I think what are the things that, you know, obviously the things that gave you joy as a kid aren't necessarily going to excite you, as an adult, but things that generated curiosity and things that pulled you in that direction. I think those are important things to look at before we were ultra conditioned. What are passions that you had that you kind of let go for pragmatic reasons because, well, that's just not practical. And
mm,
I think those are all different things that you can look at and reflect on and go back to and ask yourself, how authentic is this? And sometimes we'll go back and revisit those things and go, well, actually, those things don't actually inspire me anymore. But asking the question, going through those processes, I think that's important. And I think the other thing is just to acknowledge, and I referred to it before, but systemically we do play a lot of roles. We have these different layers to us, and we develop
mm,
parts of our personality in our childhood and our youth, and a lot of those elements stay with us. There's no getting rid of them, and those parts of us have needs as well. But just because we're not, it doesn't mean we have to express the inner child all the time, right?
yeah.
That's not inauthentic. It's just, but reflecting and respecting those different parts of us. And I think when you look at it holistically, if you can be true to enough parts of those values you have, those needs that you have, I think that is part of being authentic for yourself. So and actually, as we talk about it, I think that those are interesting perspectives to look at it from. Being authentic with yourself and being authentic with others in relationships. And some people
Hmm.
aren't even, they're lying to themselves. They're not even being honest with themselves. And that, if you can't
Sure.
even do that, then that's the starting point before you try to be authentic with other people.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the whole foundation for emotional intelligence, that you have to start with understanding yourself and then manage yourself before you can manage your emotions with others, etc.
Yep.
But yeah, and I had a conversation this morning with some other coaches actually about, the process of aging and how maturity fits in. We didn't speak about this topic specifically, but it relates well in the sense that, it's easier now, and we are all, I don't know their ages, but we're all between around 40, 50 years old, I guess. Um, And it's a kind of sense of relief nowadays that we don't have to care about those things anymore. So it's much those social context or social pressures that are obstructing or us or maybe reducing our opportunities to be more authentic. They're becoming less important. So it becomes easier. So there's I also saw some kind of age curve where looking at when where in life statistically people feel more or less happy. It seems to be a dip around 40 or something, but then around 60 it's really high again. Um, but I mean, there's no statistical evidence for this or anything, so I don't know the accuracy of it. But it's interesting to think about in the process of just aging and maturing, and also maybe where you are in your professional career. When you're in your 30s, there's probably a lot of stuff going on. Thinking systemically about how many different relations and different stakeholders you have to refer to, and it can be very confusing. A lot of both relationships, but also maybe people to sort of please in that sense, if we're talking about authenticity. And at least for me now, if I'm only speaking about my own personal experience, I mean, I'm between 40 and 50. It's easier to handle. It's much more easier. I can see it more clear now, and some stuff I don't have to worry about or think about so much as I did when I was 30 or whatever, but a few years ago. So maybe that's also just a process that we have to go through. But as you were talking about some tools, maybe there are some opportunities there for accelerate that process and make it a little bit easier for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely, and I totally agree with you. I think um, when I look back and people lament that they get older, but I feel now the best I've ever felt. I think I'd never want to go back to being 25 again. I just emotionally and mentally have just developed so far beyond that. I mean, it would be great physically because I still like to play basketball, and it would be great to still be able to do all those, to jump as high and to run as fast. But all that aside, I think I just feel way more comfortable in my own skin. So there is an element to that. Obviously, in our human development, as teenagers, we're trying to find our place in the world. So there's a strong sense of trying to fit in. You're transitioning from the family to the community, and you're more influenced by your peers. And then as you get into your 20s, into the studying or being at a workplace, you also want to try and fit in and be accepted, because on some level we all understand that cooperation is the key to our survival.
Mm.
So there's that piece. But as we get older and we get more confident, more comfortable, obviously it's just easier to be authentic and not to really care so much about what other people think. And I think that's actually leads to a really important point, because we talked last time about fear, and fear is a big driver in that kind of, if we think about the consequences of not being able to cooperate with other people, being having
Mm.
to be left alone, to our own devices and so on. But if we can, and as I said, my philosophy of fear is behind a lot of our negative feelings and emotions. And so when you think about the role that shame and guilt have to play in keeping us from being our authentic selves. So I think that's a really important thing to be aware of when you can start to, I think we have, it's, we always laugh at older people who are like, aren't afraid of looking silly, or of what other people are going to think of them. They've just kind of, and this is by no means all, because there are still people who are in their 80s who are worried a lot about what other people think. But the people who
Sure.
can, who can turn that corner and don't live with all that shame and guilt, I think that's a huge step in helping you really, live authentically and express yourself in a way that feels authentic without offending other people.
Yeah. Yeah, and just imagine what it does to releasing I guess positive energies. I'm thinking about it, but just being able to be creative. Think about authenticity in artistry. I mean, I think that's maybe one of the most important sort of measurement points when we're talking about artists. If we're talking about art or music or whatever, but is this can we sense the authenticity here? I mean, okay, you mentioned already that I like metal, right? if we if we look at a band and they're not being authentically metal anymore, I mean,
Sell out.
they're yes,
Sell out.
completely. Right? And the same thing with the artist, right?
Absolutely. And I
So
think the creativity is a really great place where people have a sense of authenticity, right? There may be an artist who really wants to be successful and they are putting elements in their art and their creativity in order to, meet the expectations or in order to, and it becomes inauthentic and people get a sense of that. I love to write and here in Hamburg, we've got an English writers group and it's interesting to hear people's motivations. Like there are people who have a story to tell, and then there are people who really they want to write and they want to be published or whatever. And I'm not saying this pertains specifically to the group of people that I work with, but you encounter people who want to be a musician, a rock star, or whatever. I know that was one of my aspirations as a teenager. But they have these desires and they're not driven by this authentic passion to do an art form, to be creative. They're driven by these other fears of or these reasons of wanting acceptance and wanting the attention or wanting to be loved by people. And so I think looking at your motivation is a really important one.
sure.
Why are you, why are you behaving in a certain way? Why are you creating the art that you're creating? Are you really expressing yourself or are you trying to do it to please someone else? I think that's a really interesting question to ask because I write obviously I write my blog and so on because I have information that I want to share. I have things that I hope will add value to other people's lives because obviously this podcast and the blogs I write, they don't pay me any money. It's something that I'm hoping I can pass on to other people. And so I think true artists, I guess this is why there's a lot of starving artists because they don't compromise the what they're trying to express. And maybe they're the only one who gets it, right? So I think art, that's a really good one to point out that, creativity is a great forum to look at, this feels and looks authentic or this doesn't look and feel authentic. And it's interesting what triggers that response from other people, right?
Yeah. But it could also be two-folded, actually. I'm realizing now. I mean, think of an artist or a band that have established themselves in one art form or expressing themselves in one way and creating a fan base that they're being authentic in that sense. But the fans might only see one part of the artist or the ideas, and if something else comes out, then the fan base might assume that this is not authentic, but maybe it is in the in the artist actually.
But
Uh,
exactly, if they do make that move, and you've seen artists or performers who've been around for a long time and want to take things in a new direction, they do the concert and everybody wants to hear their classic stuff, all the stuff they're familiar
yeah,
with, but they push through and they shared the new direction that they've gone in, and I think that's important. That's authenticity because if they're just doing the stuff that people, churning out the same stuff that was successful for them in the past, we all evolve and change. And who we were yesterday isn't necessarily who we are today. And if we're trying to live this image of who we used to be, that also is not authentic, right? So,
yeah. I was going to come to that. I mean, thinking sustainably, then,
mhm.
what creates sustainable success or some kind of sustainable authenticity. It doesn't have to be. It's not fixed, right? It's not
No.
fixed at all. And I was thinking when we were discussing, or when I was thinking about this topic before, I was also thinking, how in terms of what I mentioned before, how we develop. But what I stood up for as being very authentic 20 years ago is probably quite different from now. So it's not a static thing at all. It's something that we all probably develop
Yeah,
all the time.
absolutely. And I've known people on a political level who were really conservative and then became more liberal as time went on, or even the other way around, who had all these ideals and leftist ideals, and then as life moved on and they became more pragmatic, they realized actually that doesn't resonate with me anymore. And so on so many different levels, we evolve and grow, which is a great thing. And so what we thought was authentic to us, and I don't think it's fair to look back and kind of judge yourself too harshly, because that was who you are at the time. We all make choices and live our life with the knowledge and understanding that we have at that time. So
Yeah.
I think just because you're different now than you were back then doesn't mean you're more authentic now. It just means you're clearer on your values. You know more about what you don't like, and maybe your level of confidence is that you can actually embrace those things and express them in a way that you couldn't before, or you didn't feel comfortable before.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I really, I can really subscribe to that empathetic view that we could be much more forgiving to ourselves, in terms of, how authentic we can be, but also to others. I mean, we're very quick, I think, in general, including myself, to judge politicians, for example, that you said, 10 years ago you said this, now you're saying this. How can I trust you? But it's looking at it from that view. Things do change, and we know more and more. And it's not. I mean, authenticity maybe isn't about that. I mean, there has to be a forgiving time lapse of how how the progression goes, right?
Yeah, and talk about a tough profession to be authentic. And we want that in our leaders. We want authenticity, but how hard is it to walk that line? I mean, obviously politicians are they're, if you look at what's driving them, what's their aspiration, they want to try and attract as many people to their message or their way of thinking, or the way they want to drive their agenda forward. And so I imagine it being very hard not to compromise, and to try and show yourself in a way that other people is going to be appealing to other people. I don't know of any, I'm sure entertainers do it and so on, but I don't know if there's any kind of career path that's equivalent to a politician, that where you really have to, you're trying to express yourself in an authentic way, but you have to also hold yourself back in so many ways. And look,
Mm.
that's a profession I would never want. I have no desire to ever be a politician, and I imagine it
Yeah,
to be really challenging, really challenging. And
yeah,
then you have so many demands on from so many different directions, and you're trying to please so many people in order to gain the most support for your campaign or whatever. And so yeah, I just can't imagine how difficult that is.
yeah,
So yeah, it's
yeah.
an enviable
But that's,
position.
yeah. But also that's also interesting. I mean, how are you allowed to change your mind? How refreshing can that be? Obviously, I mean, stating that questions, of course, we have to be able to change our mind. But maybe, especially when we're looking at leaders and politicians, that we're not really accepting that people are able to change their mind. I think it could be very, very refreshing if there's a thought process behind it, right? But so what I'm emphasizing, I guess, that for me, authenticity is not all about sticking to your judgment or whatever. That you can, that it's not a fixed thing. You are allowed to change your mind and to develop, and that's authenticity is not fixed in that sense.
No, it's not about consistency, and I think we should encourage people to change their mind if it no longer resonates with them. I think the problem that people have with politicians in changing their mind is when it seems like they change their mind to suit the popular opinion, right? When they're
Yeah, sure.
flopping around on issues and they don't have they're not clear about their values. They're not clear about what they stand for. I think that's the area where inauthenticity really comes through. But if people, authentically have this one way of thinking, one way of believing, and then have experiences or new information that changes their mind, I think we should certainly be encouraging that. I think if you if you hold an opinion just because you've always held that opinion, I mean that's stagnation. I mean that's the reason. And there are plenty of people who, well, I've always believed this, and that's, that's not any more authentic. That's just believing into a dogma. I mean, dogma is essentially that kind of static, unchanging, belief structure that can't adapt with time, even though we've learned and grown and experienced and know that, yeah, it's time to look at things from a different perspective.
Mm. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm taking away a lot of awareness around authenticity from this conversation, actually.
Good. Yeah, and I don't think you should be so hard on yourself about about authenticity. I think knowing you over the years, I think that you come across as very authentic, and I think you don't. It's not always appropriate to expose every part of your personality in every situation, and I don't think that's being inauthentic. So.
No.
Yeah. So look, why don't we wrap it up with just a few, yeah, what kind of ideas? Because I've taken a bunch away from this conversation too, and I've given a lot of thought to authenticity. But I think I just want, in terms of what you want people walking away from this conversation with, or maybe what you've learned from this conversation, are there any kind of bullet points, headlines that you want to finish up with?
Um, Yeah, well, maybe okay. Emphasize. I mean, from at least from the leadership theory part of view, that authenticity is something that's really important, especially when we're talking about walking the talk and role modeling and what people are willing to follow in terms of integrity, etc. So it's a really essential part of leadership and having a positive. Uh, Positive effect on other people. But I think that's a really good point that we just talked about, that it's not static, right? Authenticity, it's also about development and maybe a kind of a search or a journey to that never really ends. It's a maturing journey to be more aware of your own values and opinions, etc., and then you can embody them in a more authentic way. I think that's it's a never ending journey in that sense.
Yeah, I think what I really took away from today is some of the points that you made about the finding the balance and when is it appropriate to be authentic. I think it's always appropriate to be authentic. Just it's to what degree and what part of yourself you're expressing. And I just want to remind people that it's a process of overcoming your shame and guilt. I think that's a really important one. I think if those are, for me, fear-driven motivators, and I don't think that's the thing that should be motivating your behavior, or that I don't think that's a helpful thing. So being always every day trying to find ways to be your most authentic self. But in order to do so, as we talked about, it's about doing the inner work first, looking at what are your values, who am I really, and what roles am I playing, and being aware of the roles that you're playing in life, and making sure that the way you're being and the way you're communicating isn't to try to isn't the strategic approach to try and get a response from someone or trying to get someone to like you. If you build the confidence in yourself and you learn to like yourself, you'll feel a lot more comfortable that other people will also like you for who you are, and it'll be way easier to be authentic that way. And that will, we've talked about it on different levels, but that will impact your life as a whole, your personal relationships, your friendships, your ability to negotiate with people, whether it's a business or personal level. And then if you're in a leadership role, your ability to express yourself a way where people will have respect for the fact that, okay, we have a difference of opinion, but I see the level of confidence and I see that this is part of your value system, and that will engage people to to consider their opinions, or to at least go, okay, this is authentic, and I'll take you for who you are. I'll take you from at your word when you're speaking to me, when you're communicating to me, and I'll respect the fact that we have a difference of opinion, because I know this is based on your values and you're authentic in the way you're expressing them, rather than you trying to tell me something that I want to hear, or you trying to make me feel a certain way, even though it's not really what you mean, right? And so I think when we're aware of those things that we're putting out there just to get a response, just to get a reaction, or if we're afraid to show a certain part of us because of guilt and shame, not because we think, well, look, this could offend someone, or this could make someone uncomfortable. I think that's also a valid reason not to totally overwhelm someone with your personality. But but look, I mean, the more you can get to a point where you don't care about what people think, but you still respect how they feel, right? I think not fearing judgment, but willing to put yourself out there to a point where, well, it's also, people need to also show me the same respect and accept me for who I am. So I think, sorry, I've kind of pulled a lot of things there into my summary, but I think those are things that are important to me authentically. And and your point also that it's a spectrum, and that you evolve over time, and that you have the opportunity. Not everyone takes it, but you have the opportunity as you grow and know yourself better, and become more confident, that you have the opportunity to become more and more authentic over time, and that's a great thing. You'll be happier for it. You'll be less stressed for it, and I think people will accept you more for it. And the friends that you have, I think, will be the people who really like you for who you are. So.
Yeah, and I sorry, I just, when listening to you, I just want to emphasize one more thing, and that's the part about empathy. I think we, for one part, we can be more empathetic with ourselves, but also to others. But also this part of, I really do believe that being empathetic and putting yourself out there to listening to different points of views and different opinions, that's a process of strengthening your own authenticity and what you believe in, to really try to tap in and be listening to and asking questions and immersing yourself in different kinds of conversations that it all builds into your own authenticity.
I agree.
So it's not about taking a stand. It could be, but it's not necessarily. It doesn't equal being fixed in a standpoint, rather than searching for different sources of information and different kind of conversations, and through that allowing the process to become more authentic.
Absolutely. Stephen Covey, I love his message of seek first to understand, then to be understood. I think that is so important, and you make a really important point there. I think the more we listen to other people, the more we see ourselves. Hermann Hesse talked about this in a few of his writings, but about, there was one of his novels that I read where he talked about, we don't hate the things in other people that we can't see in ourselves. We only hate the things in other people that reflect something we don't like about ourselves. And look, I don't want to say that's 100% true, but I think it does play a big role in ourselves. And I think when we're asking, when we allow the mirrors that are around us in the form of other people, to help reflect, who we are and how we're expressing ourselves, I think that's really helpful, and it's a big role in authenticity. And I think one thing I want to also finish on is, I was thinking about this actually as well, how it relates to the podcast, because podcasting as a medium is a confirmation that authenticity is important. And that's not to say every podcaster is authentic or whatever, but I think the reason that people are so drawn to these kind of conversations, like you and I are having, or someone like Joe Rogan, who has these 3-hour conversations with a variety of different people, and people will tune in for 3 hours to listen to this conversation. I think it's because it's authentic. It's these impromptu conversations where it's not all scripted, because
So
a lot,
scripted,
a lot of the mediums we have before are these half hour or even short interviews with people where there's some really specific questions where there's, and a lot of it's trying to get a certain response from people, and it's all very scripted and contrived, and people are craving more authenticity in that respect. And so I think that's why podcasts as a medium have become really great, because there are these conversations or there's people just sharing their thoughts, and for the most part, I think they are authentic. I think a lot of people are trying to put themselves out there in a very authentic way and see what comes back, what kind of feedback comes back, how people respond to it. Are they taking away something that is of value to them? So I think for me, podcasts is a perfect confirmation that authenticity, and we'll see how the medium evolves and whether it becomes less authentic. But I think I think YouTube's kind of the opposite, because people are putting themselves out there to see how many likes I can get, or Facebook or whatever. Social media in general tends to be, we show the best side of our life. People
Exactly.
looks like they're constantly on vacation, they're living the best possible life, and that, I don't think that's authentic. But I think this medium, I think, is one that is very authentic. And so we didn't even touch on social media and how inauthentic a lot of that is, but
Yeah.
maybe a conversation for another time.
We talked about the social context, and I guess a lot of the social context is out there on social media. So
Absolutely.
indirectly, yeah.
Yeah, and certainly there are people on social media that are authentic, but I think it has, because of the motivation to get a lot of likes and approval and interest. You tend to put the stuff out there you think people will like. But even there, the things that are really authentic sometimes really get the spikes in likes and viewership or whatever. So you never know, and I don't think that authenticity is something that can be created. I mean, there's people who will coach you on how to be more authentic, but I think it comes from within. And I think when you're clear on who you are and you're confident enough to express that, I think you're on the right path to authenticity and to being a happier person.
Sounds good.
All right, do we want to leave it there?
Yeah, I think that's a good ending point. So yeah, I'm pretty happy about that.
Fantastic. Okay, well then we'll wrap it up. I just want to thank everyone for listening again. I think Toby, you and I both are doing this because we hope we're adding value to people and encouraging people to think. And so, on that note, if you're watching this on YouTube, like and subscribe if you think it's going to benefit other people. Share the podcast. We'd love to have more listeners, because it'll give us more feedback, more responses, more stimulation to have good conversations that hopefully will benefit everyone, including ourselves. So with that, Toby, have a great day. Everyone listening, I hope you're well, keeping safe, keeping healthy, and making sure that you're keeping your mental health in a good state. So until next time, my friends, be well, and thanks again for listening.
See you